It's a bit dominant, isn't it? Anyway, sorry, I must go. I've got 19.3 minutes left. Look, everybody, of course, as we know, is thinking about the future in all sorts of ways, how you can think about the countryside, the city, how they connect, and all sorts of things of that nature, as you well know. But one of the things that strikes me, and perhaps is one of the central questions of the age, is where do we belong, wo ist unsere Zugehörigkeit, when everything is on the move? And that's my central question for the last year or so. And things are moving, as you know, very fast, perhaps too fast, we can't see clearly. And I encapsulate that, and it's very difficult to translate into German, this title, The Civic City in a Nomadic World. This is the civic meaning belonging, giving back, and of course, the constant movement everywhere. And this, ironically, is the final event of the Quito UN Habitat, 20-year summit in Quito last year. And that just shows you that a lot of people are on the move, perhaps too many people on the move. And that, I think, has a psychological effect. Because all of these transitions that are occurring are obviously, to some extent, overwhelming. And I'm not necessarily saying that this sort of thing is going to happen to us. This is just an artwork in Taipei. But really, there are things coming from the undergrowth of our mind that are very unpredictable and I think potentially dangerous. Obviously, things like Brexit and so on are just representations of that. So many people are really asking themselves, where next and how? And one of the issues is, of course, is that the world is turning to its darker face. Apprehension is in the air. The grey zone is disappearing. A constant struggle between our social selves and our tribal selves. All of these things are happening simultaneously and have within them, obviously, a danger. And clearly the role of cultural institutions and culture is key in that. And Patrick Geddes, an urbanist and biologist, once said, a city is more than a place in space. It's a drama in time. And I think when you just look around, we can see that. And for me, that's a wonderful encapsulation of someone saying this 120 years ago. So the world is in motion. And we'll come back to that in a second. The city's in motion. It's constantly being rebuilt. And often things that are anchor points, physical anchor points, disappear. And the name of a pub might suddenly change from the King's Head to the Queen's Head to I don't know whose head. But you know what I'm getting at. And of course, then the big question, for me at least, is where are the zones of encounter? Where, when difference meets, because of cities are obviously places where strangers predominantly meet, where are those zones of encounter? And where are, more importantly, the places of empathy, where we can show empathy? And I think you can see that in the way artists in particular try to change what, for example, in this case, this is Chicago, obviously, what a piece of public art might be. It's not just a king or a queen, it's something like this interesting thing. And here, I think, the power of third places, spaces, in every sense, obviously physical spaces, are becoming increasingly important. This happens to be a library in Seattle. But in fact, even banks are trying to become third places. I'm not into banks, but I'm just saying they are even recognizing that we need to have different types of building structures and so on. This is the Deutsche Bank in Friedrichstraße in Berlin. And this is the main bank in Antwerp, where the bank itself has moved to the 5th floor, and all the bottom floors are for people like these that you see here. So let's look at this a bit more closely for a moment. I think there is a return of the nomads, and obviously digitization has made that possible, as we know. But people are moving for all sorts of other reasons. The city isn't good enough. They cannot meet their aspirations. Now, of course, we want people to move and have different experiences in different places, different countries. But the question for the city from which they left is perhaps will they leave, or will others come who are interesting, who give vibrancy and life to their city? And so these nomads, whenever you look around, this is just again in the metro station in Berlin, you know, obviously there's music, and this guy has got all the names of the cities on his bed that he's carrying with him. And I think these signals you can see everywhere, wherever you go, and we of course are all experiencing it. And there is an element, as it says here, of a bit of hype that this is only about the hipster world. And I don't think it is that at all. It's more, it's much more than that. Obviously, there are groupings, perhaps the under 35s, who are doing this more than others. But I think we can see that it's extending to many, many other population groups. And it was just interesting, I captured this guy, this was Vancouver, but I don't know if you can see that he happened to have a bag which said roots. And I thought, thank God, he's got roots. Or he hasn't got roots. I don't think he has got roots. I don't know if he's got roots. Anyway, perhaps he has, but he's certainly got a computer. And then, of course, there are the 80 million refugees and the 10 million stateless people who exist in the world. But if you take the total movement of people in the world at this moment, you know, Chinese, tourists and so on, it's probably about 1 billion people. So this is an astonishing fact of movement of all types of people, from business people to people who are poor to whatever. And one grouping, of course, in the Middle East, as you know, that in the Emirates, the United Emirates, only 14% of people are really Emiratis. The rest are from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, and so on. And as you can imagine, those conditions are not so wonderful. This is just some of them leaving work, and no wonder they are smiling. And then, of course, there's a wonderful program, the Erasmus program, which spreads students from here to there. And there was a wonderful thing that Umberto Eco said. He said, this is the program which really brings us together. And there was a study in the EU which estimated, and I don't know if this is true, said 1 million babies have been born through Erasmus. Now, I suppose, well, that's probably quite good, because these are basically intercultural babies of some sort. Well, you know, they're mixed. Well, we're all mixed up. And then, of course, the whole tourist phenomenon. And the promise of this movement and globalization was, of course, always that there would be such diversity and there'd be this lovely distinctiveness. But, you know, people are moving for health, operations. The World Centre for Operations is, cosmetic operations is Brazil, etc. But then I looked at all these buses, and there was this apparent diversity, but all the buses are the same. They're all the same, and they're all in different places. And then there are 30 million Coca-Cola outlets in the world. There are 38,000 McDonald's. So this diverse, globalized world has some elements of the opposite of distinctiveness. And of course, the other bits of movement are goods moving, and most of them are coming from China. These containers, there are 2 million containers that are in Europe that are empty because we've got nothing to send back to Asia. And of course, in nanoseconds, it's finance that is moving, and that is obviously creating intense conflicts and problems for cities that are attractive, you know, places like Hamburg, Berlin, Amsterdam, Lisbon, and so on. And within all this movement, and money moves, is of course, this unfortunately is Italy, southern Italy, of course, is crime. Crime moves at the same speed of light as does the flow of money. And indeed, there is pollution that moves. I'm only trying to give you a headache. I'm showing you that this is not, nothing is clear. Because I just read the other day that a Chinese banker who was thrown out of China had 12 citizenships. And you can buy the cheapest one in Europe, by the way, is Cyprus. The cheapest in the world is the Dominican Republic. So that's what I mean. Where do we belong when everything is on the move? And one thing that is really dominantly on the move, of course, is English. And that language diversity, and I think for theatre, it's absolutely crucial. We must do a project, somehow, about this question. Because language, of course, is one of the main expressive forms. And if English is going to dominate, what about all those other forms? But perhaps most dramatic, of course, is the movement of reality. And I saw this sign in Dublin on a library, we spend more times or more minutes in our virtual worlds than outside. And that, again, I think, has an unbelievable psychological impact. The immersive effect of, well, in this case, an iPad, but anything, I mean, you know, the phone and so on. But it is, of course, a breakthrough of unbelievable proportions. Call it the fourth industrial revolution, whatever, it doesn't matter. But there, of course, the entities like Google, which suck everything up. This is the Sydney Biennale. I bet they didn't realize they would use it to criticize them. But this is the Google train, which you go into, and you go into some sort of Googleized world. And of course, Google's great. But, you know, is it the data in my control or not? And of course, we can't hide from big data, and that's why there are the reactions, the movement you probably know about called My Data, the My Data movement. I'll allow you to use my data, not you just click on cookies and then everything is known about you. But when the biggest hotel chain in the world, Airbnb, owns no hotel rooms, when the biggest taxi company in the world, Uber, owns no taxi, when the biggest media company in the world, Facebook, has none of its own media, then we know the world has changed dramatically. But of course, it's allowed us to have all these sharing possibilities which we know about, from cars to other things, etc., goods and so on. And amazingly, all through a little mobile phone. So, what is the fixed in an age of the flexible and the fluid? You can see I like alliterations. It's all got F. Fixed, flexible, fluid. Anyway, you know what I mean. It's got to be a bit rhythmical, hasn't it? But anyway, there is an important point about that fixed. And that fixed anchorage, because the big 5 things I found that people want is anchorage, possibility, connection, being more than they could be, learning, let's say, and inspiration. And, of course, the cultural institutions could play a key role in all of that. Many people find all of that thing about this fluid world obviously incredibly invigorating. Others find it incredibly frightening, and that's the Brexit effect of that movement in the world. And by the way, that movement is going faster and faster. People speak more quickly. Television programs are speaking more quickly, the presenters, etc., etc. We walk faster, we eat faster. No wonder mindfulness is the thing that everybody is hankering after. So what we've really got, I believe, is a fragile world. And in that fragile world, when we're in the midst of redesigning the world and all its systems, the question is, how are we going to do that? What is that vision of that world, which is dramatically transfiguring? And one of the things in the context of cities is, of course, so much is apparently about Renaissance, as it says here in Zurich, but at the same time, that artist who didn't let that house be knocked down said resistance. That's the discussion we need to have about balancing rich and poor, all of these things that happen in cities. I'm only showing Gandhi because at least then the revolution might be peaceful. So there we are. So the challenge is this question of the human perspective center stage. It is then making us re-ask the question, what is the role of culture and cultural institutions? And I suppose it is, it's already been said by the 2 speakers at the introduction, it's about connection. It is about bringing together, so I don't need to say more, but I think the fundamental role is that question of bringing difference together. And this is just a conversation in Paris about the future of Paris, indeed. And of course, it's happening in an old building. It's a cultural building. Even though they're talking about the future of Paris, they actually are sitting in a place that is embodied and is imbued with cultural stuff. So, is it that? Are these fonts of knowledge with the Corinthian columns the thing that we want? Does this place need to transform itself externally as well as internally? Internally, of course, they're changing. Is it more like this? You know, this is Linz, Arts Electronica. What are these buildings going to look like, and how are they going to resonate into the street? How are museums, in this case in Antwerp, this is after the Paris outrages, how are they going to project their messages of solidarity and togetherness? And this is really where I think that question of the civic comes back into its own. How, this is an exhibition in Canberra which says beyond the self. How, I saw a graffiti just out there, it says you, me, we. I don't know if you saw it on the way from the hotel. Exactly this question. What are these signals of the civic? How can we, the cultural institutions, show that the civic is actually cool? You know, creative obviously sounds cool, but I want to make the word civic sound really cool. So I want to be civic. I really love it. You know what I mean? That sort of feeling. Very difficult because the word sounds so worthy, and that's unfortunate. So the question is bringing these differences together. And because I promised you I'd show you Lisbon, because you said you belonged to Portugal somewhere. But this is a lovely symbol of that, which is in the public realm and in the public space, speaking to us and communicating. Because the city communicates through every fibre of its being and either draws us into ourselves or opens us out. And one point I'd like to mention, this is Bologna, is they have a contract called the Bologna Regulation 2014, sounds very bureaucratic, but it's about how do we co-run, co-manage, co-create the facilities that we as a public, private, NGO sector have together. It's very interesting. So if you looked at it from a developmental point of view, you could say cities, there was a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 city. I'm only mentioning this briefly just to remind ourselves of the different sort of priorities we had through time. That first, if we think of 50 years ago, it was all about hardware. The guys, they were normally guys, sorry, you were a construction guy, sorry, no, but we love them. But it was all the people in the construction industry, you know, the road engineers, who were really defining how the city worked and felt. And there was a cultural repertoire which tended to be, I would say, buildings, you know, slightly enclosed, not transparent, and so on. And of course then people said, is this enough? Can't we do something else? Can't we think of something that is softer? Isn't there some sort of soft placemaking, which is more about the emotions, the senses, where I feel I can give back to the place I live? And obviously part of this is technology, that new phase, but technology, of course, is not everything. And the cultural version of that obviously brings in things like the creative economy sectors that you all know about. But perhaps what we're on about now, and there's perhaps a 0, 4, 5, 6, I don't even know that, is really that question of this co-creative, this making, shaping, co-creating together a place, a cultural experience, when we know we're living in a world of the here-there phenomenon. And that physical entity, that city, will look and feel different. It will operate in different ways, which brings me to something which I want to highlight and as I round off a bit, which is obviously blending that village feel with that wider cosmopolitan feeling together. And so in that world that is so small, I've had to ask myself a question, and I've tried to ask it for a long time. The great rethinking we know about, of course, the first one was all about urban design, focusing then on aesthetics. That means that places look different, they feel more accessible. Airport, this is Adelaide Airport, that looks semi-Aboriginal and a bit Western with all those lines. Then there was the phase, as you know, in many places, that we are a city of culture. But again, that culture was probably slightly contained and not as open as one would wish it to be. And of course, we want that. But that was only a platform, perhaps, for the knowledge industries, to attract those knowledge industry people to come to your city because they feel it looks good, it feels good, the infrastructure. The city is our campus, it's a learning experience and so on, which set then the platform for the startup culture, which everybody talks about in all, at least the larger cities in Europe and well beyond. So this, of course, is Finland, but as you can imagine, it's fine, we love the Finns. No, I love them. So I once asked myself this question, what if? And the first time I asked that question was in Perth. This is in Perth, in their theatre. What if, it's a simple question with a bloody difficult answer, what if there were no cultural institutions as we know them and we reinvented them again? What if we didn't have that 19th century typology? What if? Would they run differently? Would they have as many staff? Would they have different staff? Would they connect differently to their populations outside? Would we then suddenly find a vast range of hidden resources and potential and vitality that could explode into these new spaces? I haven't got the answer, but I just like that question. What if we had no cultural institutions and reinvented them again? I'm not saying they would be like this, but this is Holzmarkt in Berlin, which is quite a hub, and it looks like that. I'm not saying you knock the Körber building down and do that. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just showing that there are instances of thinking this through. This is Eindhoven in the Netherlands, which again has a very strong, this is Stripe S, has a strong role in the city. And so it's quite interesting. Can you see it says new rules, Danger Museum, new rules. I mean, I'm only playing around, as you know. But, or here, no art inside. Can you see xenophobia? Look, all I'm really saying is what if? Can we be relaxed enough to even ask the question, what if? Can we have a conversation that says, what if? Even though it might be against our self-interest, and let's see what happens. Would that be the new art gallery? This is Amsterdam again. This is Lisbon. You see, I said I'd put Lisbon in for you. Anyway, you know what I mean. And what if the big cultural event is the Biennale of Democracy, rather than the Biennale of whatever, you know, Theater der Welt or whatever? So, all I'm really saying is creativity, this thinking laterally a bit, is a renewable resource. And heritage is non-renewable, although we can reinterpret heritage. And it's that lovely tension between the two, which opens out a potential dialogue, just like this Paris stuff there is old and new at the same time. But all of that conversation I'm talking about really requires persistence and courage and tenacity. And it obviously means bringing different parties together. And it means being more open than closed, which I found this the other day. Look, for the non-Germans, this just means this is the administrative path and there's no way through. Okay. Anyway, let's go back. So when we talk about the bureaucracy, and I love bureaucracies because my latest thing is the creative bureaucracy, you know, just the twist. A cliche, bureaucracy, horrible? No. It's obviously about going against the Spartendenken, the siloed thinking and so on. Only if that happens are we even going to begin to have this conversation. And this, what this really says is we need to shift from law. You know, mostly what happens in Germany, Italy and Spain is if something's a recommendations, people behave as if it's law. Whereas what we should be doing is saying, what are the principles? What's the intent? And law, if it needed, comes much later. And it's only then that I believe we can unscramble some of the blockages, because we obviously need the public institutions to be part of this conversation, to really rethink what the rules and incentive system might be for these new cultural institutions that we would love to have. And that, of course, requires building trust of some sort. So finally, if I were to put it into one set of words, we moved from a world where everything was about predict and provide. I know you had a bit of a problem with that. your 12-year process. But in general, we have a predict and provide moving forward system, certainly in urban planning. And what I would encourage is elastic planning. We're incredibly strong in our principles. We're strategically principled and tactically flexible because we never know how it's going to go. But if we've got the strong principles, we know we're going in the right direction. So a lot of it's not about money. It's about shifting the mind. Thanks a lot.